economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Yes, you haven't heard this voice in about a week. I've been in Budapest, Hungary. And first of all, let me, before I go any further, thank, first of all, Colonel Alan West on Monday for hosting the show. Then on Tuesday, we had Kelly Shackelford. And on Friday, we had Representative Louis Gohmert, along with a number of individuals that were in studio with them. I thought they did a very good week, and it was great. I was very grateful for them to do that. But I was teaching Christian ethics, as I do every other year in Budapest, Hungary, in the Word of Life, and it was great. We had 77 students, both first and second year students from 17 different countries, and so that was good. Then at the end of the week, they had a pastors' conference, because one of the big issues in Hungary, homosexuality. Yeah, you've heard it. Although in some respects, I think they're doing a lot better than we are. They actually have been able to put in their Hungarian constitution that marriage is defined as one man and one woman. Whoa, that's pretty amazing. And it reminds me of the first time I went there 12 years ago. There was somebody that said, Mr. Anderson, I don't want to offend you or anything, but as I see my country coming out of communism after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I see my country going from darkness to light. But Mr. Anderson, as I see your country, I see it sometimes looking like it's going from light to darkness. And I thought it was very interesting. We have the highest corporate income tax in the world. They have one of the lowest. Certainly entrepreneurial activity is happening there. And, of course, it's just been really exciting to see the training of some of the Christian leadership in Europe for the 21st century. So, anyway, that's where I was last week. I'm back, and, of course, we have a lot to talk about. We have, I think we have some primaries. Don't we have the New Hampshire primary coming up here? Of course, we had the Iowa caucus while I was gone. Then we have an interesting set of circumstances for our listeners in Nevada and South Carolina. This is a little different, because on the 20th, you have the Nevada Democratic Caucus and the South Carolina Republican primary. Then it switches around, and then on February 23rd, you have the Nevada Republican Caucus, and then on the 27th, the South Carolina Democratic primary. Then you have kind of Super Tuesday, March 1st, in which a lot of you in the listening audience, where just an enormous number of delegates are at stake, will be voting as well. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say something about the Super Bowl last night. First of all, for those of you that are Denver Bronco fans, congratulations. Or for our listeners there in Colorado, of course, they defeated the Carolina Panthers. And just a couple of quick facts from a couple of individuals that have pulled these together. And one is that Peyton Manning became the oldest quarterback ever to win the Super Bowl. Also the first quarterback to reach the game with two different teams. First time two quarterbacks, which were number one picks, competed against each other in the Super Bowl. And, if nothing else, the age gap. Peyton Manning, 39. Cam Newton, 26. The largest gap in Super Bowl history. John Elway, of course, Denver's general manager, became the first to win a championship, first as a player, then as a general manager. And for those of us that talk about media, a 30-second Super Bowl ad cost at least $5 million. And even though I was coming back and only saw one or two of those, I went online to watch a few of the others. Some pretty good advertisements, a couple of corny ones as well, but are they really worth $5 million? Don't think so. But nevertheless, that is all that we'll cover in terms of some of the popular culture. Today, we're going to focus almost exclusively on these two different presidential debates. We'll first look back at the Democratic presidential debate in New Hampshire, and then we'll look at the Republican presidential debate, which, as I have pointed out before, sometimes a debate does not necessarily help a candidate, but sometimes a debate can hurt a candidate. The all-time classic is when you had Gerald Ford in 1976 make a stumble, which was enough, I think, to allow Jimmy Carter to win the presidency. And that, of course, was in a presidential debate, not one for a particular nomination. But there are many that believe that some of the comments by Marco Rubio and then the response from Chris Christie might have actually hurt Marco Rubio enough for Chris Christie to do better. So we'll see how that plays out. But I thought it would be good at first to really begin to focus a little bit of time and attention on the Democratic debate. And of course, this is an open line today. So if you would like to join the conversation, make a comment or give us an observation, certainly a lot to be talking about today. And in the New Hampshire Democratic presidential debate, it was simpler because you just simply had two people on the stage. And I'm looking forward to the fact that, 7 on the stage isn't too bad, but I think we'd be a lot better off if we get back to the 3 or 4 most likely individuals that will be nominated so we could hear more from them. One of the comments we wanted to start with is where Hillary Clinton said that she simply believes that Bernie Sanders and his platform simply cannot be achieved.
Senator Sanders and I share some very big progressive goals. I've been fighting for universal health care for many years, and we're now on the path to achieving it. I don't want us to start over again. I think that would be a great mistake to once again plunge our country into a contentious debate about whether we should have and what kind of system we should have for health care. I want to build on the progress we've made, go from 90% coverage to 100% coverage, and I don't want to rip away the security that people finally have. 18 million people now have health care. Pre-existing conditions are no longer a bar. So we have a difference. I also believe in affordable college, but I don't believe in free college because every expert that I have talked to says, look, how will you ever control the cost? What I want to do is make sure middle-class kids, not Donald Trump's kids, get to be able to afford college.
So again, a couple of comments there. First of all, the argument that you have is a little bit of an intramural argument because anybody that says, well, I would support the Democratic nominee because they really want us to provide affordable care. No, both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have said, and she said in that particular clip, that they want to move towards universal care. In other words, you can come up with different ways to express it, maybe similar to what you see in other countries. In a minute, we're going to hear from Bernie Sanders even making that case. Or, as Bernie Sanders has simply said, it's just like providing Medicare for everyone. So if you think Medicare and the VA are working pretty well now, even with their cost overruns and with the limitations that many people face in terms of what is on the drug formulary, you can only use certain kinds of drugs, you can only go to certain kinds of doctors and those kinds of things. If you think that's working well, then a Democratic nominee is probably your person. But as we're going to hear in just a few minutes when we talk about some of the debate in the Republican side, there are some major problems with the so-called Affordable Care Act, which has not been affordable. And so in some respects, even though she's trying to make a distinction, sometimes it's a distinction without a difference. She's positioning it saying, I want to take what President Obama has done and just extend it. Bernie Sanders basically saying, I want to do the same thing, but let's not get all this bureaucracy, just basically give Medicare for everybody. And everybody's under one governmental system. Either way, you end up with something that does not have a great deal of free market principles, virtually none. It also really encourages, I think, bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats in the Department of Health and Human Services or other places to make decisions about what you can have access to in terms of drugs and surgeries. And that's, of course, the big issue that a lot of Americans are struggling with right now. Let's take a break, though. We'll hear from Bernie Sanders because he makes the case that we should have this system because, after all sorts of other countries have it, so why not the United States? Well, if it's working out for them, maybe it'd work out for us, but that's not exactly what we're finding. Let's take a break. We'll come back and continue talking about some of those comments made first at the Democratic presidential debate, and then we'll open up the phones for your comments. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when a company decides to move its headquarters overseas, we hear politicians criticize the move, but ignore the reason they moved. The latest source of political complaints came when Johnson Controls decided to merge with Tyco. Hillary Clinton called the merger outrageous. Bernie Sanders is calling the executives corporate deserters. The editors at the Wall Street Journal once again tried to explain in simple English why companies are doing this. The politicians who denounce these companies are also the ones who have maintained the corporate tax code, and that is the reason executives are taking such actions. Tyco has U.S. headquarters in New Jersey, but the company is legally established in Cork, Ireland. Johnson Controls will now move its legal headquarters from Wisconsin to Ireland. And there's a very good reason for this. The U.S. federal corporate income tax rate is 35%. The corporate tax rate in Ireland is 12.5%. Johnson Controls estimates they will save roughly $150 million a year. The Wall Street Journal editors put it this way: a CEO obliged to act in the best interest of shareholders cannot ignore this competitive reality. The merger means that Johnson Controls will have more money to invest back in the United States because the income it earns overseas would not be subject to the U.S. tax rate. None of this seems to make any sense to many of the candidates running for president. They should be proposing that we reform the tax code in America so that we are more competitive with the rest of the world. Instead, they are proposing various schemes to punish companies and their executives for making wise economic decisions. You don't need a degree in economics to know this is a bad idea. It will force more companies to leave this country for more favorable economic circumstances. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
At any point, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're into the primary season, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time today and throughout the week talking about some of the election results and what it means. Of course, the Iowa caucus was something that was significant in the sense that it was maybe a few delegates up for grabs. Let's face it, there weren't that many. Ted Cruz got 8, Marco Rubio got 7, Donald Trump got 7, Ben Carson got 3, and then you had 1 for Bush, Fiorina, Kasich, and Paul. That was really it. Not very many. Many more, as we'll hear in just a minute, at stake in the Clinton-Sanders debate, and we'll talk about what that means. But nevertheless, now we're moving into it. New Hampshire, of course, tomorrow. And then for our listeners in Nevada and South Carolina over the next couple of days, there will be a caucus primary. And then, of course, you come to March 1st, where you have 14 different electoral events. 12 of those are primaries. One is a caucus. For our listeners up there in Alaska, is a Republican caucus. And then one of those is kind of an opportunity for Democrats who are voting abroad. But then it really begins to be fairly intense. And while I'm talking about that, if you have not signed up for our Pray, Organize, and Vote, please do so. As you go there, you'll see a lot more information. If you've already signed up, you might go back, because now we have sections, for example, to, of course, to help you know whether or not you're registered, how to register online, which I used the other day to help somebody register, a voter guide, the primary election calendar, one that will be coming soon on how to even find your polling place, and much, much more. So it's available at the website pointofview.net. And many of you are already, no doubt, registered to vote. Some of you, if you would like to register your friends or neighbors or church members, you still have an opportunity, but many of those are beginning to close down. So take that opportunity to make sure that individuals, first of all, are registered to vote, and then that they will go out and vote intelligently. Well, let's look a little bit more at the Democratic presidential debate that happened last week in New Hampshire. And as I mentioned, Bernie Sanders really making a case that we should have this kind of universal health care because, after all, lots of other countries have it.
Every major country on earth, whether it's the UK, whether it's France, whether it's Canada, has managed to provide health care to all people as a right, and they are spending significantly less per capita on health care than we are. So I do not accept the belief that the United States of America can't do that. I do not accept the belief that the United States of America and our government can't stand up to the rip-offs of the pharmaceutical industry, which charge us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs.
Well, and again, as we have tried to explain on this program before, and I have a commentary coming out this week on that issue as well, there are reasons why, indeed, the prices are very high when you have a novel drug that has come to the market for the very first time, and there are some very significant expenses that some of these private-based healthcare companies or pharmaceutical companies actually are trying to recoup. Now, I'll be the first to admit that there is some resonance with the American people about big pharma and some of the ways in which they manipulate the market. But the reality is that one of the very significant reasons why many of those countries in Europe, and having been in Europe last week, I can speak to this again, that they were able to spend that kind of money on, for example, government health care, is because in many cases they did not have to spend it on the military. They were so able to say, we don't really have to have a very large defense department because we're really sort of dependent upon the United States to defend us through NATO. And so whereas we had to spend a very significant amount of money even after the Cold War, but even during the Cold War, that sometimes prohibited this. And we also have found out what this actually means. When you provide this kind of universal health care, it is really beneficial if you've got a cold or you've got a cut or you broke your arm or something like this, because after all, you go in, you get it treated, and you say, I didn't have to pay for it. Of course, you did with your tax dollars, but we'll leave that off to the side. But let's say that you have a coronary issue, or maybe you're near the end of life, or maybe you're over the age of 65 and you have some very important surgery. At this point, then, cost containment cuts in, and those benefits that you have by being in a place like the United States of America really begin to evaporate. And, of course, the question we always love to ask is, if you are somewhere on this planet and you need life-saving surgery, which country would you like to go to? And it's amazing how many times even foreign dignitaries do everything they can to come to the United States to get surgery here, to get treatment here, to get cancer treatment, cancer drugs here. Tells you a lot about what would happen if we begin to change the system. But nevertheless, that was one of the issues of Bernie Sanders. And of course, another one that Hillary Clinton has been breaking up is, okay, I would like to make college affordable, but of course, Bernie Sanders wants to make college education free. Here's what he had to say.
In the economy today, everybody understands that we need a well-educated workforce. This is 2016. When we talk about public education, it can no longer be K through 12th grade. I do believe that public colleges and universities should be tuition free. Well, how do we pay for that? It's an expensive proposition. I do believe that we should substantially lower student debt in this country, which is crushing millions of people. We pay for it, in my view, by a tax on Wall Street speculation. The middle class bailed out Wall Street in their time of need. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class.
So again, just a few ideas that he has put forward. And I might point you to a piece by Robert Knight, who's been on the program with us many times before. It appears in Wall Street. This one's in Washington Times, although it's in a number of other places. But this particular article, Washington Times, came out today, keeping the lid on the truth about socialism. And he says, when Senator Bernie Sanders came out within a coin flip or two of beating Hillary Clinton in the Iowa caucuses, it signaled the Democratic Party's astounding march towards an outright embrace of socialism. He says young Democrats overwhelmingly supported the avowed socialist senator from Vermont, with 84% of those under 30 backing him. National polls show similar results. Only voters 45 and older in Iowa went strongly for Hillary Clinton, who has managed to avoid the socialist label while advocating policies that often mirror those of Mr. Sanders. And he says people familiar with the shocking historical record of socialism may scratch their heads in amazement.
How could so many young people expect others to pay entirely for their college education, all their medical needs, and their job training, which Mr. Sanders has promised if he's elected? Then Robert Knight says, we could write off the young pro-socialist voting bloc as yet another group eagerly joining the free stuff army that President Obama has been cultivating since taking office 7 years ago. But there is much more to this. People failing and falling for the siren song of socialism are not cautiously ignoring the many failures and callously ignoring many of the failures and atrocities committed in this doctrine's name. They're often blissfully unaware. He goes on to really talk about the fact that if you really want to spend some time trying to educate young people about some of the dangers of socialism, you can see a striking difference. For where I just was this last week, where there was socialism and communism until the fall of the Berlin Wall, there are a lot of people, even sometimes young people, with some kind of memory of what that looks like, because they can look around and see all the dingy buildings around and recognize that this was the, if you will, the result of socialism. And then they can begin to see some of the new factories, the new buildings, and all the rest that have come about when we went to or at least when Hungary went to a free market system. But in this country, socialism is just sort of an abstract idea. And so one of the things I think is so striking is indeed to see that Robert Knight in his latest piece just reminds us that free stuff may sound good, but there is a cost, and it's a very significant cost. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls. We will certainly have a little bit more to hear from certainly Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and then we'll be moving on to the Republican presidential debate. But as I mentioned just a minute ago, this is a good day to go to our Pray, Organize, and Vote. Many of you in the listening audience will be voting in the next couple of weeks. And so if you are looking for information, we are trying to provide it in a very effective way. And so that's one of the reasons we encourage you to sign up. Number one, we want you to pray about the future of this country and pray about this election. Number two, we want to help you to organize. And that is, we give you some resources so that, for example, you're probably registered to vote, but you know what? You may know some people in your sphere of influence. They could be family members, they could be neighbors, they could be church members who may not be registered to vote. And we have a box there. Are you registered? And you can check out real quickly to see if you're registered to vote. Then if you want to register to vote, we give you the online voter registration. And I used this the other day to help register somebody who was not registered to vote. We have voter guides, and we've already talked about that in previous programs, which are going to provide you with an enormous amount of material. And so please take the time to look at the fact that your vote will matter. And this is going to be a much more contested election than even in the previous years. So please take the time to find out not only who's running for president, but also know who's running for Congress and who is running for the state legislature and all sorts of other votes that you will be casting this year. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Pray, organize, and vote. Let's come back and I'll take some phone calls. We'll be with you right after these important messages.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about the Democratic presidential debate. A little bit later, we'll get into the Republican presidential debate. But let's take a phone call. We'll head out to Louisiana first. KPAE and Ricky, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Appreciate taking my call. Real quick, there is free education and free health care, universal health care in Russia and Cuba. And I'm thinking Bernie Sanders is modeling, his health care after those two because they're, impeccable, health care systems in Russia and Cuba. Well, I've been to both countries. Let me tell you what the health care affords you in Russia. I went to go visit. I was with a missions group, and we went to go visit a large, one of the largest cancer hospitals in Russia. You know what was available for health care?
Probably nothing that you would probably... Yeah.
They gave you a bed to die in.
Yes.
Period. No drugs, no prescription, nothing to alleviate your pain. You was given a bed to die in. That's the sum total of health care in Russia for terminal cancer ill patients. A bed to die in, period. Okay, Cuba. Cuba was a little better. I went to Cuba, and for major surgery... You know what? The strongest painkiller was available at the time I visited Cuba was a few years ago. For major surgery in Cuba, if you have a major surgery, the main or the strongest painkiller that was available was aspirin.
I was afraid you were going to say aspirin. Isn't that amazing?
Right. Aspirin. So there goes Bernie Sanders' model of universal health care. And we all know why. It's the young college people because all they're given nowadays in college is whether you came from a monkey, atheism, evolution, and communism. That's all they taught. They're not taught anything else in college anymore. So it's no wonder why the virtues of communism. But I would just, anybody that wants to know what communism looks like, just go over there and visit like I did. You'll find out real quick what real communism is. In fact, Russia, when I first got there, I asked one of the locals there, I said, where can you buy toilet paper? Because I figured out, to me, that was the most important thing. They said, well, if you can find it, it's 5,000 rubles.
Yeah.
So anyhow, there goes your Russian model of Bernie Sanders utopia. Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call, man.
Well, thank you. And of course, they just talked about the fact that there's a shortage of toilet paper in Cuba, too. And, even Michael Moore, Michael Moore did a film a number of years ago, really assailing and criticizing the healthcare system in the United States. So then he goes to Cuba. But even in his movie, I'm thinking, I don't want to go there. Even what he showed, and obviously he was trying to put a better face on it, saying, look, they actually have better health care in Cuba. How you can say that with a straight face compared to the United States, I do not know. But even in the film, he showed all sorts of examples. And so, Ricky, thank you for giving us sort of the on-the-spot look of what that looks like. So Bernie Sanders certainly is going to have to sell this idea of universal health care. And, of course, another one that came out today in the Wall Street Journal, it's called The Windmills of Bernie's Mind. Now, those of us that studied Don Quixote when we were in high school might remember he was tilting at windmills. Well, this one's not only about a figurative windmill, but also literal ones, because even though Senator Bernie Sanders is from Vermont, two Vermont state senators, John Rogers and Robert Starr, both Democrats, introduced a bill that would ban wind projects above 500 kilowatts. The average industrial wind turbine farm is 1.5 megawatts. So the bottom line is they want to ban the kinds of things that Bernie Sanders wants to put in there. And it is a good example of people that are green. Everybody likes the idea of wind power, but nobody wants a wind turbine in their backyard or even in their line of sight. And there is just one more story that's not looking so good for Bernie Sanders. Well, he also was trying to explain the caucus system. And I thought for just a minute, here's Bernie Sanders talking about the Iowa caucuses.
This is not like a winner-take-all thing. I think where we now stand, correct me if I'm wrong, you have 22 delegates, I have 20 delegates. We need 2,500 delegates to win the nomination. So this is not the biggest deal in the world. We think, by the way, based on talking to our precinct captains, we may have at least 2 more delegates. What the Des Moines Register said, you know, there were I think there were half a dozen coin flips, a fairly chaotic type of situation. At the end of the day, no matter how it's recounted, it will break roughly even. And by the way, I love and respect the caucus process in Iowa. See, and I don't have to say it because they voted already. And I love New Hampshire, too, because you haven't voted. But look, I think people are blowing this up out of proportion. But I think we need improvements in the process by which results are determined.
Well, that's a nice way of saying that. I think there was probably some, how do we like to say it around here? Voter irregularities in the caucus process. The bottom line is that Hillary Clinton has 23, Bernie Sanders has 21. That's the official tally. And so you can see that it's neck and neck, and probably will be in New Hampshire as well. Now, let me add one more point before we move on, and that is there are what are called superdelegates. Now, these in most cases tend to be members of Congress, governors, and others, and it's clear that Hillary Clinton has 362 of those to Bernie Sanders having 8. So it could be something that could cause all sorts of conflict at the Democratic convention if that plays itself out. In other words, it could be that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton come up even through some of the caucuses and primaries, and then Hillary blows him away when you come to the convention, because a lot of people that were not up for grabs as a delegate, but were actually delegated by the, quote, establishment, the Democratic establishment, would put her over the top. And if that's the case, I got a feeling there are going to be a lot of people that supported Bernie Sanders that will be really upset. So remember that. We won't come to that again probably for some time. But again, one of the questions also on the table is the issue of the VA. Should that be privatized? And here's some comments from both of the candidates.
Well, first of all, I am absolutely against privatizing the VA, and I am going to do everything I can to build on the reforms that Senator Sanders and others in Congress have passed to try to fix what's wrong with the VA. There are a lot of issues about wait times and services that have to be fixed because our veterans deserve nothing but the best. But you're absolutely right. You know, Rachel, this is another part of the Koch brothers' agenda. They've actually formed an organization to try to begin to convince Americans we should no longer have guaranteed health care, specialized care for our veterans.
You know, Republicans give a lot of speeches about how much they love veterans. I work with the American Legion, the VFW, the DAV, the Vietnam Vets, and virtually every veterans organization to put together the most comprehensive piece of veterans legislation in the modern history of America. That's what I did. And I brought it to the floor of the Senate. Every Democrat voted for it. I got 2 Republicans. We ended up with 56 votes, and I couldn't get the 60 votes that I needed. That is pathetic. Republicans talk a good game about veterans, but when it came to put money on the line to protect our veterans, frankly, they were not there. What I did next, Rachel, is I had to retreat a little bit. I had to compromise. I did work with John McCain. I did work with Jeff Miller over in the House, and we put together not the bill that I wanted, but probably the most comprehensive VA health care bill in the modern history of this country.
So again, just a couple comments about the VA. One last one before we take a break, and then we'll move on to the Republican convention. The whole question to Bernie Sanders, after all, Hillary Clinton has a lot of expertise about foreign policy, and you've been a senator, but you don't have that expertise. How did he respond?
I fully concede that Secretary Clinton, who was Secretary of State for 4 years, has more experience. That is not arguable in foreign affairs. But experience is not the only point. Judgment is. And once again, back in 2002, when we both looked at the same evidence about the wisdom of the war in Iraq, one of us voted the right way and one of us didn't.
You know, I've said this before, and I'm very proud of it, that when it comes to judgment, having run a hard race against Senator Obama at the time, he turned to me to be Secretary of State. And when it comes to the biggest counterterrorism issues that we faced in this administration, namely whether or not to go after bin Laden, I was at that table. I was exercising my judgment to advise the president what to do on that, on Iran, on Russia, on China, on a whole raft of issues. Because I know from my own experience that you've got to be ready on day one. There is just too much unpredictable threat and danger in the world today, to try to just say, wait, I'll get to that when I can.
So again, ready from day one. You can sense that she hopes to use that against whoever she might be running against, because most of the front runners on the Republican side can't say that they have much foreign policy experience. So we can already begin to see a little bit of the general election campaign unfolding even in some of these primary debates. When we come back, we have a lot to talk about in terms of the Republican presidential debate, and all of it, of course, is going to culminate tomorrow in the vote in New Hampshire. So if you'd like to join the conversation, especially as we get into the Republican Party, lots of issues, lots of controversy, lots of back and forth. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Don't forget, we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote resources. If you haven't signed up, this is a great way to be prepared to cast your vote intelligently. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First of all, I want to thank Catherine for pulling these together. First of all, we had some of the clips from the Democratic presidential debate. Now we'll go to the Republican presidential debate. And the first one is become sources of controversy. Out of these clips that we're going to be playing now, you have a little bit later, we'll talk about the revisiting by Ben Carson, former Surgeon Ben Carson, as his concern about Senator Ted Cruz's campaign. So we'll get to that. Of course, that's been in the news for some time. It's, a matter of fact, a story that I thought maybe had a 1 or 2 day lifetime and seems to not seem to be going away. So we'll talk about that. But the one that we're going to lead with is what a lot of people are calling the robotic Democratic performance by Senator Marco Rubio. And on Saturday night, he used a phrase a number of times that he talked about the fact that it is the reality that indeed President Barack Obama knew exactly what he was doing. The fact that he used it 4 times and it seemed rehearsed and it was attacked instantaneously by Chris Christie has seemingly hurt his campaign. He's received, according to the Washington Post here, scathing reviews on the Sunday and especially, the Sunday talk shows, and was needled by some of his opponents. On Twitter, he earned the moniker Rubio Bot, and clips of the debate played repeatedly on cable news and were watched by hundreds of thousands of people who may never even have seen the original debate in New Hampshire. Now, I first of all want to play some of this, then get into what many people believe that he meant and whether or not it made any sense. But a lot of this had to do with the whole question of which was raised by Chris Christie, of whether or not we need another inexperienced first-term senator to serve as the President of the United States. Here's the comment.
And let's dispel once and for all with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. Barack Obama is undertaking a systematic effort to change this country, to make America more like the rest of the world. But I would add this, let's dispel with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing.
You see, everybody, I want the people at home to think about this. That's what Washington, D.C. does. The drive-by shot at the beginning with incorrect and incomplete information, and then the memorized 25-second speech that is exactly what his advisors gave him. See,
those are the facts. Here's the bottom line. This notion that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing is just not true.
There it is.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
The memorized 25-second speech. Experience really matters. You heard this on the stage tonight. We've heard it said on the stage that President Obama knows exactly what he's doing. I'd like to ask all the veterans listening out there tonight who are waiting in line for health care, who are literally dying because the Veterans Administration doesn't work. Do you think Barack Obama knows what he's doing? I don't. And I'll tell you something, anybody who evaluates him as knowing what he's doing in managing the government doesn't know how to manage a government themselves.
Anyone who believes that Barack Obama isn't doing what he's doing on purpose doesn't understand what we're dealing with here.
So again, you can kind of get a sense. 4 different times talked about the fact that he knows exactly what he was doing. Now, here is a couple of comments. And by the way, if you'd like to join us on this dust-up, if you will, between Marco Rubio and Chris Christie, we'd love to get your comments. I see one of our callers wants to talk about Donald Trump. We'll get to some of his comments in just a minute. But first and foremost, according to David Weigel at the Washington Post, he said Rubio was offering a definitive answer to the charge that he's a Republican Obama. This is something that has been repeated. Chris Christie, but not the only one, has made that kind of comment. And while most of the opponents portray the 44th president as basically naive, Rubio argues that he proved to be a young, charismatic politician who came into Washington and was able to get what he wants. So the argument he's trying to make, number one, is don't say that I'm a Republican Obama and incapable of getting things done. As a matter of fact, at one point he talked about the fact that he passed Obamacare, the stimulus, Dodd-Frank, dealing with Iran. We may not agree with the answers. Of course they don't. But, don't say that he didn't know what he was doing or he couldn't get things done. He was able to accomplish quite a bit because, number one, sometimes charismatic politicians can do it. But number two, this is something that has been eluding some of the candidates and even the mainstream press, because the other thing that Marco Rubio is saying is is that he knows exactly what he was doing. And in a den, many people have said that in some respects, he is saying exactly what many people in the Tea Party were saying. And that is, when you had these overwhelming elections that happened in 2010 and 2014, the so-called midterm elections, there were a lot of people even then that were saying, no, we don't think that the president is incompetent. We believe that the president has an agenda, and we don't like the agenda. And a lot of it goes back to the fact that, indeed, if you want to use one example, and we've had this on our program before, we've had Dinesh D'Souza on, and he's written about this in his book. He's produced this in his movies, that indeed the president was really wanting to change America. And so whether you look at the Dinesh D'Souza book or the movie, or whether you look at a variety of other people that might not be seen as controversial, other commentators have talked about this. Even former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich has talked about this, and others. This is all Saul Alinsky kind of material. And certainly Barack Obama was influenced by Saul Alinsky, but let's also remind yourself that Saul Alinsky actually met with Hillary Clinton. So whereas in some respects Barack Obama was reading the works of Saul Alinsky and applying them, Hillary Clinton actually was, if you will, mentored by or discipled by Saul Alinsky. So those are, I think, a couple of really important issues to put on the table. And so while we're talking about some of these topics, I think it is important to recognize that this is going to be an issue that could begin to affect Marco Rubio. The original goal of the Rubio campaign was this: come in third in Iowa, which he did, come in second in New Hampshire, which up until this weekend looked like a possibility, and then come in first in South Carolina. That was kind of the scenario by which Marco Rubio believes that he would eventually get to the point where by the time we get to March 1st, we would at that point then have the opportunity to begin to pick up some significant number of delegates. What has happened this Saturday and what happened then on Sunday and now here we are on Monday in terms of some of the blowback and some of the reaction to what looked like sort of rehearsed lines about Barack Obama really knowing what he is trying to do, I think illustrate the fact that this scenario may not play itself out quite as effectively as the campaign anticipated. But we will see. And something that we've talked about before, when we say Saul Alinsky, I would imagine most of our listeners are familiar. If not, we've done a lot of programs in the past, and we'll probably do some more in the future, because as I pointed out just a minute ago, certainly Saul Alinsky was very influential in the life of Barack Obama as a community organizer. But as most people tend to forget, Saul Alinsky was even more influential in the life of Hillary Clinton. And so those ideas that we've already talked about may surface again if indeed the Hillary Clinton presidency becomes a continuation of the Barack Obama presidency. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have some clips from Jeb Bush and from Donald Trump and from all of the candidates on North Korea. Then a little bit of the controversy between Ben Carson and Ted Cruz. A lot to cover. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll give you a lot more opportunity to comment about some of this in the second hour, because we'll leave some time for your comments, questions, and interaction. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Today, for example, my commentary is on companies moving overseas, and I point out that this is another good example of some of the criticism that has come from Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders about the decision, in this case of Johnson Controls, to move over to Ireland. And having flown right over Cork, Ireland, on the way over and back, I was thinking about this particular commentary, but also, again, it relates to what has been taking place in the debate. And as we've mentioned, there are also some great resources you can find in our Pray, Organize, and Vote. So visit our website, pointofview.net. We even have a video to check out whether or not you're registered and how to register if you've not. So there are viewpoints, there are videos, and there are resources. So please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll take some more calls right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, organize, vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to look at Donald Trump for just a minute and then take some phone calls on that, as well as some of the other issues. And so we've already looked at the Democratic presidential debate that happened last week, and of course looking at and listening to some of the clips from the Republican presidential debate held in New Hampshire over the weekend. So we're going to listen to a few more of those, but also welcome your comments. I'm leaving enough time for you to make comments about a candidate that you may like or not. And certainly we've looked at some of the intramural discussions right now and debate points between, first of all, we looked at Chris Christie and Marco Rubio, and then we'll look at a little bit later this ongoing flap between Ben Carson and Ted Cruz about the Iowa caucus. But whenever you have a debate, sometimes it's good to ask the tough question. Marco Rubio, why have you changed your view on immigration? Ted Cruz, nobody in the United States Senate seems to like you. You haven't been endorsed by anybody. Are you couldn't be able to even get along with some of those individuals? The question for Donald Trump came up, and that is the issue of eminent domain. Now, this clip takes a while, but that's in part because he took some time to explain that, and then, of course, have Jeb Bush jumping in. But this question about using eminent domain to try to get a parking lot for your casino, also the issue of bankruptcy, is an important question, and, of course, it was asked Saturday night.
So eminent domain, it's not that I love it, but eminent domain is absolutely, it's a necessity for a country, and certainly it's a necessity for our country.
So would that be yes on the Northern Pass project?
Josh, the difference between eminent domain for public purpose, as Donald said, roads and infrastructure, pipelines and all that, that's for public purpose. But what Donald Trump did was use eminent domain to try to take the property of an elderly woman on the Strip in Atlantic City. That is not public purpose. That is downright wrong. And here's the problem with that. The problem was it was to tear down. It was to
Jeb
tear
wants
down.
to be. He wants to be a tough guy. He wants to be a tough guy tonight.
It was to tear down
I didn't
the
take
house,
the property.
and the net result was you tried.
I didn't
and
take
you
the
lost
property.
In the court.
The woman ultimately didn't want to do that.
That is not true.
And
the simple fact
is,
to turn this into a limousine parking lot for his casinos is not a public use. And in Florida, based on what we did, we made that impossible. It is part of our Constitution. That's the better approach. That is the conservative approach.
Mr. Trump, take 30 seconds.
Let me just, he wants to be a tough guy. A lot of times, you'll have, and it doesn't work very well with
How tough is it to take property from an elderly woman?
Let me talk. Quiet.
How tough is it?
A lot of times, that's all of his donors and special interests out there. So, that's what it is. And by the way, let me just tell you, we needed tickets. You can't get them. You know who has the tickets I'm talking about to the television audience? Donors, special interests, the people that are putting up the money. So it is. The RNC told us we have all donors in the audience, and the reason they're not loving me, the reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money. I don't need their money. And I'm the only one up here that can say that. You wouldn't have the Keystone Pipeline that you want so badly without eminent domain.
Right, exactly.
You wouldn't have massive, excuse me, Josh, you wouldn't have massive factories without eminent domain.
So again, you get a little bit of a sense there, and we didn't play all of it, but earlier he'd made the case that we wouldn't have the Keystone XL pipeline if we didn't have the ability to take some land so the pipeline can go through. Certainly wouldn't have certain roads. Sometimes they talk about hospitals, schools, whatever. And of course, Jeb Bush trying to make the case that that was for personal property. But again, think of the Supreme Court decision on Pfizer and some of the others that came out. So this I think was an attempt by Donald Trump to address one of his issues. So let's go to a caller would like to address this issue of Donald Trump. Marcy in Ohio. Thank you so much for calling today.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
I would love to hear from you. I think you tend to be a Donald Trump supporter, so talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I guess, first of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate the program. I listen to it almost every day, and I am on the same page for the most part until we got to these two candidates. But I guess I am a conservative Christian, and I've been raised in a conservative Christian family. I guess my problem or my concern would be that we've had good Christian candidates in the past, and unfortunately, our society is becoming more and more unchurched and more on welfare, and those are the people that are voting. So in the past, I've been shocked and shocked again at who we vote for, and then who becomes our president, and then they get a second term, and I'm shocked again, and I'm like, wow, I guess I need to quit being so shocked. This is, going to keep happening. But I think when Trump came on the scene, I felt like he was a gift from God, wow, we actually might get somebody that would beat out Hillary or and the Democrats, whereas our good Christian candidates we've had in the past obviously aren't getting the society's vote. So I guess my frustration lately with what I'm listening to, your radio station, which I agree with you on most everything, but I guess my frustration is I feel like that we're taking the Christians and saying, vote for Cruz instead of Trump, which I know you didn't say those exact words, but pretty much. And I think that might win our little battle here, but to win the war, I think we're going to need Trump. I think he'd make a very good president, and I think that he is our only chance in beating these Democrats.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for calling in because I've really had trouble finding people that would come on this program and maybe support Donald Trump. So you fit into that category. Now, I might mention that next week we have Robert Jefferson in studio. Now, we're going to be talking about his new book, but I got this funny feeling we'll probably talk a little bit about his it's not an endorsement, I understand that, but it's sort of this tacit approval of Donald Trump. And if I could get Jerry Falwell Jr. on, who has endorsed Donald Trump, I'd love to hear their arguments for that. And as I hear yours, it says, it'd be nice to have a Christian in the White House who has a kind of Christian morality and fits very well, and everybody feels like indeed this would be an individual that we could not only have in the White House but could come and speak in our church. But the reality is the growing secular society makes it possible that somebody like Donald Trump might appeal to a broader constituency. And to make your point is, it's amazing how many people who have registered as Democrats who nevertheless in some opinion polls say that they would vote for Donald Trump. So I think you've made a pretty good case there.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, and if you'd like to join our conversation, Marcy, of course, coming out on Donald Trump, and you had a chance to hear some of the back and forth with Jeb Bush and Donald Trump on the issue of eminent domain. Since we're talking about Jeb Bush, let's go back to the interchange between Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. I'll do that after our break, but we'll come back and focus on that. Then we're going to have a chance to hear from most of the candidates about North Korea. And we're going to get into the Ben Carson, Ted Cruz issue. And, of course, we certainly welcome your phone calls. So perhaps some other of you are supporters of Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or Chris Christie or Donald Trump or Ben Carson or some of the others that were on the stage. Rand Paul will no longer be on that stage, and some others are beginning to drop out. But if you have some comments, we certainly do welcome those. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll give you a chance to make your comment in just a minute. But let's take a break. Lots of resources on our website today, pointofview.net. A couple of really good articles, as well as all of our Pray, Organize, and Vote resources. So take the time to visit, sign up, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when a company decides to move its headquarters overseas, we hear politicians criticize the move but ignore the reason they moved. The latest source of political complaints came when Johnson Controls decided to merge with Tyco. Hillary Clinton called the merger outrageous. Bernie Sanders is calling the executives corporate deserters. The editors at the Wall Street Journal once again tried to explain in simple English why companies are doing this. The politicians who denounce these companies are also the ones who have maintained the corporate tax code, and that is the reason executives are taking such actions. Tyco has U.S. headquarters in New Jersey, but the company is legally established in Cork, Ireland. Johnson Controls will now move its legal headquarters from Wisconsin to Ireland. And there's a very good reason for this. The U.S. federal corporate income tax rate is 35%. The corporate tax rate in Ireland is 12.5%. Johnson Controls estimates they will save roughly $150 million a year. The Wall Street Journal editors put it this way: a CEO obliged to act in the best interest of shareholders cannot ignore this competitive reality. The merger means that Johnson Controls will have more money to invest back in the United States because the income it earns overseas would not be subject to the U.S. tax rate. None of this seems to make any sense to many of the candidates running for president. They should be proposing that we reform the tax code in America so that we are more competitive with the rest of the world. Instead, they are proposing various schemes to punish companies and their executives for making wise economic decisions. You don't need a degree in economics to know this is a bad idea. It will force more companies to leave this country for more favorable economic circumstances. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
That once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, well, actually, I guess all our lines are full, but as a caller drops off, you'll be able to join us, and we'll take those calls in just a minute. But I did set up, just before we went to the break, the fact that Jeb Bush had a few jabs for Marco Rubio.
I'm proud of the fact that I have 12 Medal of Honor recipients, for 30 admirals and generals that believe that I would be a steady hand as commander-in-chief, that I served as governor of the state of Florida, where we cut taxes and reduced government. I took on very powerful interests, forged consensus, fought for my beliefs, implemented them, the state was better off. We had 8 hurricanes and 4 tropical storms in 16 months. The whole state was turned upside down. It required a steady hand. Leadership, you learn this. You learn it by doing it. It's not something that just show up and on the job do it. It's not to say, let's be clear, Marco Rubio is a gifted politician. And he may have the skills to be a president of the United States. But we've tried it the old way with Barack Obama, with soaring eloquence, and we didn't get a leader, we got someone who wants to divide the country up. The next president is going to have to forge consensus to bring about a set of common purposes so that we can move forward again on this country.
Well, again, you get a little bit of a sense that the real attack, if you will, on Marco Rubio is lack of experience. And, of course, I talked about his response, the way Chris Christie has used that somewhat effectively. So we'll see how the vote totals come out Tuesday night. And, of course, I'll be reporting on this Wednesday here at Point of View. But let's go back to the phone. Some of you would like to join the conversation today. We'll go to Georgia. Rosie, WAGP, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call, Kerby. I think you handled the Rubio misspeaking very well. As much as I know about the Alinsky thing and Obama and Hillary, I was all for what Marco Rubio was saying, but what he said before that, I loved even more. When he said, I would rather not be president than to be wrong on life.
Well
and I
said.
think
Yeah, one of the best lines of the night. Go ahead. Yeah.
That was my favorite thing he said. And another thing he said another time that Christians need to stand up and listen to is the fact that he said, I didn't follow what he when he was in the Gang of Eight and he found out that the people would not support it, he backed down from that, not because he was afraid of it, but because the people didn't support it. And we need a new president who will listen to the people, and if we don't support it, they shouldn't do it, period.
Very good.
Those are the answers I want to hear. I like most of the candidates that were running for the Republican nomination, but I'm definitely a Rubio fan, and I'm hoping that more of the Christians will get behind him.
Well, again, a little bit perceived from the mainstream media as a misstep, but I think he was trying to also educate America about the fact that these are not mistakes that a rookie president is making. These are intentional directives that come from his ideology. And I thought it was a good answer, but again, Marco Rubio has managed to make it look like he was just repeating a 20-second speech or a line or a throwaway line or something like that, instead of really getting into some of the detail. By the way, I might just mention that if you are sitting here saying, okay, you mentioned before Dinesh D'Souza's movie in his book. Well, the movie was called 2016 The Movie, and you can go to 2016themovie.com and you can see the movie if you haven't, because it not only educates you about the fact that Barack Obama certainly understood some of the ideas of Saul Alinsky, but it even has a recreation of Saul Alinsky meeting with a young Hillary Clinton. Of course, these are actors, but they give you a little bit of a reminder of the fact that this isn't just a Barack Obama issue, it's a Hillary Clinton issue as well. So I appreciate a phone call from you, Rosie. Let's take another phone call. In Texas, KBJS. Patricia, thank you for joining us today.
This is just a Barack Obama issue.
Well, Patricia, you with me?
I appreciate phone call from you, Rosie.
Well, we'll get to her in just a minute because maybe she was not listening online here. So let's go to Helen in Georgia. Helen, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. I was just calling about Cruz and the comparison between him and Trump. As far as being a Christian or whatever, we really don't know that much really about either one of them as far as their Christianity or the belief that we would like to have a president that would be a Christian president. But also, I just feel like Cruz is using that to win the election. I just feel that in my spirit that he's just using this because he knows that we, as Christians, would like to have a Christian president and one that would be for the Constitution and what we stand for, and the religious side also. And I don't see him as being a president that's going to carry out in heaven. I think he's going to keep things about what they are now.
Had a little trouble hearing some of that, but again, one of the points that I'd always take is we don't know as much about some of these particular candidates, and that has always been a little bit of a question mark. If indeed you say we have an untested senator, and that's been used against Marco Rubio, but sometimes it's used against Ted Cruz, then just think about how much more that is true of a Ben Carson who's never been in public office, a Carly Fiorina who's never been in public office, although he at least has run for office, or a Donald Trump. So you can kind of see how some of those arguments certainly affect people across the board. But let's see if we can go back and pick up Patricia here in KBJS in Texas. Patricia, you with us now?
Yes.
What would you like to add to the conversation?
I was just talking about the difference in Cruz and Donald Trump. Donald Trump comes across as like a Johnny-come-lately conservative, and he's very arrogant, and his tone, his pride, instead of like a real, it's like a not a nice pride, or whatever you want to call it. And I think Cruz has stood up. He stood up, so that's why I don't like him up there. And we need people that the rhinos don't like and the Democrats don't like. And I just think he's what we need up there.
You know, one of the funny lines that always makes me smile whenever I see it in the debate is when Donald Trump says, well, nobody likes Ted Cruz, and I'm not sure that's fair, but okay, that he has a personality that some people don't like. Well, I was thinking, Donald Trump, that's certainly sometimes true of you as well. He's always saying, oh, these people like me, they don't like me. I'm not so sure as well. So if likability is a factor, and sadly it is, because likability certainly is one of those components that is necessary for individuals to vote for you. And it doesn't matter whether you're running for mayor or governor or senator or president. Likability is an important factor. It is interesting that both of them have, in a sense, said that about each other. But when you come down to who has demonstrated in actual office being willing to fight the establishment, I think the odds on go very quickly to Ted Cruz, don't you think?
Yes, and also Louis Gohmert has the same testimony. They don't like him either, but I like Louis Gohmert.
Yep.
And I know someone said if Trump gets the nomination, she's going to go vote for the Democrat side. And I said, please stay home. But she says, no, I cannot stand Donald Trump. It grates on her nerves, his arrogancy. And and like I say, he's just Johnny come lately to the conservative scene, so you don't know if he's sincere. And he sounds like he knows about as much about the Bible as I do the Quran or something. But anyway, that's just my opinion. They have some good candidates, besides Ted Cruz, but I think he's the one that will actually try to do what he says.
Well, appreciate your phone call. Let's take a break. And certainly when you look at negativity and the negative issues, that certainly very high for both Hillary Clinton as well as for Donald Trump. That being said, a lot of people tomorrow are going to vote for Donald Trump in New Hampshire, and a lot of people tomorrow are going to vote for Bernie Sanders. The real question actually in New Hampshire is not who wins. I think we already know that answer. But how does number 2 and 3 do in the Republican side, and how well does Hillary Clinton do given the fact that she will lose out to Bernie Sanders tomorrow? Once again, let me remind you that when we talk about the number of delegates that are actually at stake tomorrow for the Republicans is 23. The number of delegates that are at stake for the Democrats is 32. So you're not going to win or lose a nomination on the basis of winning even Iowa and New Hampshire. And it's pretty obvious that Donald Trump will probably win New Hampshire. And, of course, Ted Cruz technically won Iowa. But when I say technically, he had one more delegate than Rubio and Trump. So you can see that sometimes when we're talking about small numbers of delegates, it really doesn't make any difference. Now, who wins Texas? That's a little different. 155 delegates at stake in the Republican primary March 1st. So you start getting to Florida, you get to Texas eventually. Of course, if California is still in play in June, you can see that that's where the delegates that would be necessary in order for you to win the nomination. But let's take a break. We have a full bank of phone calls, so let's take some time to hear some of your comments. And a little bit later, we'll get into this dust-up between Ted Cruz and Ben Carson. It still seems to have a life of its own. So we'll talk about that and take some of your phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We've heard what the candidates have to say, and we'll probably play a few more clips here because there's a few other things I want to put on the table, but I want to hear what you have to say. So let's go back to the phones and see if we can pick up a few more phone calls here. First of all, we'll head to South Carolina. Nathaniel, thank you for joining us today. Well, do we have Nathaniel? Maybe I'll put Nathaniel on hold here. We'll go to Hugh in South Carolina, WLPG. Hugh, thank you for calling us today.
My pleasure, Kerby. Thank you. And I guess I should never be surprised anymore about some of the negative attitudes that people have, and particularly in the debates, some of the negative and combative interaction. I would love to see someone, well, not just love, but I appreciate those who can state what they're for and give us some of evidence of their record, how they live their life, how they have made decisions, because that will affect, I believe, or determine perhaps how they respond in the office of presidency. And I would love to see them just stand on their own record, be willing to point out concerns about other people's stances, but this combative attitude, I think, is detrimental, although it's very much part of our society. And secondly, being a follower of Jesus Christ, I think those of us who believe in biblical morals should look for that particular quality in candidates, because I have concerns about many of these issues, most all of these issues that people are dealing with today. But our primary need is not security, protection from illegal aliens, or free education, a better or freer health system. But our primary need is being a country committed to God's standards, because if we pursue all these other areas and forget God, God, I think, is in the process and will continue, I believe, to withdraw his protection from our country, and we will become more and more vulnerable in all of these areas if we don't really focus on the moral issues. And while the president doesn't have to be a Christian, in my perspective, if there is a biblical Christian, one who I would believe it would stand for biblical morals and convictions in the race and has the qualities to be president, then I think we as believers ought to really look at that person with a great deal of seriousness. I think sometimes our focus is too much on other things rather than on our real need to obey God and be a decent moral country.
Very well said. You know, in Romans 1, it talks about 3 different times it says, and God gave them over. God gave them over. Of course, you can apply that to individuals and to a culture, but I think you can also apply that to a nation. If we continue to turn our back on God, then God says, okay, you'll turn your back on me, I'll turn my back on you. And so you just got some good points. And I am disturbed, and I know some people are more disturbed than others about the rough and tumble of these various comments directed at one another. For somebody that grew up where Ronald Reagan was my governor in California and then presidential nominee, there was the so-called 11th commandment that thou shalt not speak evil or ill of another Republican candidate. And we haven't seen that in a long time. I do see that primarily, though, with a Ben Carson and oftentimes with a Ted Cruz. But some of this rough and tumble that has taken place, I don't think is healthy and certainly could hurt a candidate when he or she runs in the fall in a general election. So I appreciate your comments on both points.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling. Do it again. Let's see if we can get a few more calls in here. Jacob in Georgia, I think you wanted to talk about Marco Rubio, so you have the floor.
Yes, thanks, Kerby, for allowing me to speak. And I agree with what Mr. Rubio said about Mr. Obama. I believe Obama has an agenda, and he is able to implement it through a word called tolerance. He's a master in mind control, especially with the people who are afraid to be categorized, branded as racist, not being tolerant to different things. And he has divided the country. He has brought in same-sex reunion, same-sex marriage. He has been able to give $500 million to an organization that has purposely killed so many babies in the womb.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, just looking at that alone and recognize that none of that will change either with the election of Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. So again, if you already accept all of that as good, well, then you've got your nominee. But if you say we need to do a U-turn and go the other direction, I think you've got your answer. So I appreciate your phone call. I want to give a few more, just a chance. I tried Nathaniel in South Carolina. Let's see if we can catch him back again. Nathaniel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you have the floor. Go for it.
Well, I just wanted to speak to. I mean, I was raised Christian. I'm a devout Christian, but I was raised that the government is there to protect, serve, and defend. Our country was founded by Christians who were looking for religious freedom, and yet too many times when I hear so-called evangelical Republicans, they don't seem to be speaking in a language that seems to me like a Christian. A Christian is one who, thou shalt not judge. Yet there seems to be a lot of judgment out there for people. We don't live by Old Testament, yet you hear Old Testament spit out time and time again when people are looking to judge a gay or make something about abortion or even veiled racism that is spit out. When I hear an older person, like I heard earlier, say, we just need someone that wants to do what everyone out there wants to do. Well, that's fine if everyone out there wants to do things that are legal, that are not trampling the rights of other people. I don't want to see a bunch of people hurried into this country that may or may not be radical Islam, radical Muslim.
Sure.
But at the same time, our country was founded on religious freedom. So I don't look at a Muslim and have a natural tendency towards, oh my gosh, that's a terrorist. But I do look at someone who looks in a negative manner or looks violent or looks whatever, whether they be white or black, old or young, male or female, Hispanic or, whichever, you have a second nature that lets you think about something. And too much, it just seems that I keep hearing people defend their conservatism and their, with their evangelical Republican, with, we got to get rid of abortion, we got to get rid of this, we got to get rid of that. And, I want a president who believes in the Lord above. I want a president who refers to the book as a sense and a source of where he can grow his inspiration.
Do you see any candidates that are doing that? I would say that two candidates that come to mind that seem to be, maybe three, but certainly Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson sort of fit into the category I think I hear you saying, but would you agree or not?
Marco Rubio, I think fits into that vein, but I don't think he has the experience.
Yeah.
I think Chris Christie fits into that vein. I think Jeb Bush fits into that vein. I do not think Ted Cruz does. Ted Cruz is, to me, is the same as a Donald Trump. He's a bully. He is a bully that will go contrary to people and use his superior intellect as a source of overlording you.
What about Ben Carson? Just before I come to a break, would you say that about Ben? Yeah,
he's a great man. He's done some wonderful things. He's an incredible doctor and a source of inspiration. He's not a politician.
That's for sure. Well, it's interesting enough. When we come back from the break, we'll play some of this, which Katie Kiefer said, well, now he's becoming a politician because he keeps bringing up the Iowa caucus. So we'll play that clip, give you a chance to hear some of that as well. Nathaniel, appreciate your comments, and we will get a few more of those, but I have one of those mandatory breaks coming up, as they are always doing. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to at least know a little bit more about some of these candidates, not just the presidential candidates, but also you are going to be voting for a lot of other people. And one of the things I like about the iVoter guide that is available, and we have you linked to it if you go to our Pray, Organize, and Vote, is that the Heritage Alliance has done such a good job of really digging deeper into some of those particular candidates that you're going to vote for, not just for the presidency, but 33 United States senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives. By the time you get into the state legislatures, some of the governor's races and other things, more than 30,000 elections will be taking place this year. Do you know how to vote? And do you know who you would want to vote for in some of those very key elections? That's why we want to make sure that you have access to resources that will give you an intelligent vote. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can talk about the feud between Ted Cruz and Ben Carson, and a lot of this goes back to an announcement that happened just before the Iowa caucuses. CNN's Dana Bash says our Chris Moody is breaking the news that Ben Carson is going to go back to Florida, his home, regardless of how he does. He's going to be there for a few days, then afterwards he's not going to go to New Hampshire. Whether that was true or not is kind of an afterthought, and that he was going to be going to the National Prayer Breakfast. Jake Tapper said, plus he's already announced he's going to be coming out and speaking at 9:15 local, 10:15 Eastern, no matter whether or not he knows the results, because he wants to get home. So this came out. Then, of course, you know what happened in terms of the announcement from the Cruz campaign. And this, I thought, maybe was a 1 or 2 day story. It still has a life of its own. So let's again go back to the New Hampshire debate Saturday night. This is what Ben Carson had to say.
Well, you know, when I wasn't introduced number 2, as was the plan, I thought maybe he thought I already had dropped out. But you know, today is the 105th anniversary, or 105th birthday of Ronald Reagan. His 11th commandment was not to speak ill of another Republican. So I'm not going to use this opportunity to savage the reputation of Senator Cruz. But I will say, I will say that I was very disappointed that members of his team thought so little of me, that they thought that after having hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers and college students who sacrificed their time and were dedicated to the cause, one even died, to think that I would just walk away 10 minutes before the caucus and say, forget about you guys. I mean, who would do something like that? No, I don't think anyone on this stage would do something like that. And to assume that someone would, what does that tell you? So, unfortunately, it did happen. It gives us a very good example of certain types of Washington ethics. Washington ethics basically says, if it's legal, you do what you need to do in order to win. That's not my ethics. My ethics is you do what's right.
So again, some of the comments. There have been questions that people said, did that change the outcome? If you go back and look at the studies, many people say that from the polling, it seems that Ted Cruz had the highest number of voters who said they decided a week or even sometimes a month prior that they were going to the caucus to vote for him. Some people think that actually the greatest beneficiary of that miscommunication, if you want to call it that, was Marco Rubio with that last-minute report, because indeed he actually did better than many people thought. But that is a story that still is out there, and it even showed up on the Saturday debate. Let's go to Missouri, KNEO. Katie, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, how I feel is that everyone that's running, I would vote for pretty much anybody that's running on the Republican side, and I like them all. The problem is I don't want anybody fighting over these little. When you're in a politics, you got to be really careful what you say, and then the other person got to be careful how they bring it across. But you're going to have errors made, and everybody. I would like them to stay as much close together, because we're going to need every one of these people.
Well said.
Because they're good leaders, and we need them all. When it comes down, the president alone cannot change what needs to be changed. This is a big effort to change this. We'll need all of them, and I just love Ben Carson. I think, I was around for Martin Luther King, and I would have made him president if he had had the opportunity to run. And I wouldn't mind at all Ben Carson being president, but I think there's a need also for the African-American people need a leader. I don't see one there, other than I do like Mike Evans, the pastor down there in Dallas. Mm-hmm. I think there's only a few people that could really bring them back together. And that's what I see a need. And I think he'd do that well, and I think he knows a lot about, insurance and things like that. I think he'd make a great Surgeon General, and I do like him, and yes. I like them all, to tell you the truth. But I do prefer Ted Cruz right now, because I've been watching what he's doing, and he and Marco Rubio did not agree that money should be put in for the fueling thing in Iowa. They wouldn't sign that, and they're the only two that didn't, and I like that stand they made.
Yeah, ethanol. Very good. Let me take one more call on the Cruz-Carson feud, and I apologize that we won't get to all the calls, but tomorrow I'll break it up a little bit. We'll have a book interview the first hour, so we're not just talking campaign and politics 24/7. Then in the second hour, we'll come back to the vote that will be taking place Tuesday night in New Hampshire. But let's go to Texas, KBJS. Lance, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a pragmatic. I'm not a pragmatic Christian, and I think a lot of people are, and that's fine. But I would like to point out with Ben Carson, he came to prominence, my understanding, and I think some news reports have reported this, at the prayer breakfast.
Yes.
And this man made a public stance for life and basically backhanded the President of the United States right in front of him. And he did it in the with respect and love, which is biblical. So I thought that said a lot for him. And I would say this, God raised him up. He came to prominence at the prayer breakfast. And I will say this about Ted Cruz, who I liked. I read an article in World Magazine, which is a very good Christian.
Oh, sure. We have all of them. We have Marvin Olasky and all sorts of different writers for World Magazine on quite often. So talk about that article. Go for it.
They ran an article that 75 evangelical leaders got behind closed doors several years ago, or maybe not several years ago, before the election
just a couple of months ago. Matter of fact, some of the people that participate with me on the Friday weekend edition were part of those group. Okay, go for it.
Yes. And they did a straw poll. They didn't invite everybody to the straw poll, and they decided on Ted Cruz to get behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people in the Christian community thought that was a little deceitful, and, they didn't approve of it. I don't approve of that either. I think everything should be out in the open. I think that's biblical. And so that's my comment about him. And I think the true colors of Cruz came out. Now, I like Cruz, and I don't blame him, but you said before on your show, and I love your show, you need to look at the people that they surround themselves with.
That's a very good question to ask. Yeah.
These people that were running the campaign, what they did was wrong. Granted, the report was wrong. I get that. But you don't do that to somebody, especially to a Christian brother in Christ. That was appalling to me. And I like Ted Cruz, but his campaign, that was ruthless and certainly not godly. And I'll go.
Yeah, I got to go. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time. Yeah, go ahead.
Breakfast was huge, and I think God raised him up, and I think we should look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wish I had a little more time, but the clock waits for no one, and so that. And by the way, maybe come back to that. How is it that some of these leaders, and of course, there's kind of a who's who of individuals I've interviewed over the years that got together, and they did it in part because they felt like there was such a split between various conservative and Christian leaders the last time, and they wanted to see if they could avoid some of that. So I think Lance has raised some questions, which we'll get to, but we're simply out of time, and I apologize. We have almost a full bank of phone calls here of individuals that did not get through, and I'll do a better job next time if I can to get you on, and maybe we won't play, tomorrow we won't be playing any clips, so I'll give you a chance to express your opinion. So if some of you will take a rain check, and a little less than maybe 22 hours from now, we'll give you a chance on a national program to express your opinion, but we are simply out of time today. One more time, I want to thank Catherine for pulling together some of those clips for the Democratic presidential debate, the Republican presidential debate. As always, I always want to thank Andrew for his work and for Shamila as well. But just before I say goodbye, don't forget to visit our website, pointofview.net. Pray, organize, and vote. There's some great resources, and each day we're trying to add new material. So first of all, sign up, and then come back on a regular basis to find what we've left for you. That's all we have for today. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election. to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.